hide behind the cloak. And if you stay in the mist, you gon' be soaked. So listen up, cause this hair of the dog, what's real, what ain't? Is this the fog or smog? Cause there's a difference when you breathe it in. So don't let the corporate media take you for a spin. This that morning show, they put you in the know. So I hope that you ready, cause all we do is go, go, go. Yeah, come get your info, you gon' be like, whoa. Hair of the dog, we bout that, ayy. We in the zone, we out here, yeah. Speeding the facts.
Good morning, everyone. Still morning. Sorry about the late start today. Had a few things just come up last minute. It has nothing to do with the election. I'm strangely at peace with what's happened, and we're going to get into why that is today during our show. Kerri Barber.
Yeah,
How are
hey.
you feeling this morning?
I'm actually feeling really good. Number one, I had Selfcare yesterday. So as I said on Twitter, thank you to Albuquerque's Aveda Institute. The students did a fantastic job. So part of that is what I wanted to talk about, the self-care, right? So I noticed also on Twitter, Instagram, people are really, really upset and depressed. And if you're giving into the media narrative, then you may be tempted to self-medicate today. And I want to just please do what you have to do, but do so responsibly. But I think in this particular message, I hope that you come away with the understanding that this is not a bad outcome at all. And what I saw through all of yesterday, and particularly with today's results, is your mission statement, the thing that we have been talking about for over a year. It is here, and it couldn't be more obvious to me. So I'm hoping that by the end of this broadcast, you will understand what I'm talking about and why you should be really excited about what happened. Because there's a path forward, and it's so simple, so easy. So I'm okay.
Yes, and what it requires is an open mind, right? We have to try to understand what's happened, why this has all occurred, why this isn't a lot different than 2016, and what we can do about it, right? And so hopefully we can discuss that in a way that's fairly simple to understand, and show you that fundamentally things haven't changed for progressives or people on the left or anybody that identifies on this side of the equation. And we can also look at takeaways from last night, and unfortunately the next 4 or 5 days. Excuse me. Sorry, it's you have to remember that you're coming from, this is coming from someone who lives in a country that's election cycle lasts 6 weeks.
Right, exactly. And during the previous false start, one of the dates that I really want people to focus on, and you'll see this on CNN and others, is December 8th. So regardless of the rhetoric that comes out, every vote that is legally submitted, each state has slightly different information about when they're accepting ballots and what the postmark needs to be. But December 8th is the key date. By that date, all votes have to be certified and counted according to state law. So if I am, let's say, running for president and I say, stop the count, you need to understand that despite what I am saying, that's not how the law works. And every state has their own board of election and their own rules that must adhere to the way that it's set up in the state. So on a federal level, you can demand anything you want and not have it come to be. So the difference was with the hanging chads in the previous election that went to the Supreme Court. That was a question about the state rules. and how to interpret the state rules. And what it all hinged upon was the final vote certification in Florida. So this was the state rule being discussed that ultimately affected the outcome of the election. This time is completely different because we have COVID and we had so many changes in each one of the states about how ballots were to be submitted, how ballots would be counted, whether they were going to be postmarked certified, all of these things. So this is a states' rights issue. And at a federal level, you can complain all day long, but it ultimately comes down to the states. So December 8th is really the date you want to look for. And we have said, as well as major networks has said, election night and the morning after, deep breath. We still have quite a ways to go. There are millions of ballots in every state that still need to be counted. And oh, by the way, in, particularly in Illinois and other states, every election never had the final count because, like in Illinois, mail-in ballots were always counted within the next week. So the totals that were given to you the night of the election don't include all of the ballots. So,
Exactly.
So in one respect, I really appreciate that this has caused us all to step back and better understand our own democratic process. While it may be uncomfortable, that part I think is truly helpful for all of us as adults who are not getting a civic education except through these sensationalized headlines. And just take a deep breath. This is where bureaucracy shines because we have process and all of these things. So we're actually joined this morning by Mike Toller, friend of the show, and himself, a technical election judge in Illinois. He's been on the program before to talk about the Latino vote and his Cuban heritage, and we explored all sorts of different things. So Mike, I know that you were watching polls and not necessarily working. What's your thought on the morning after?
I actually was working the polls yesterday.
Good.
16 hours or 18 hours, sorry. Anybody out there who wants to get your steps in, become an election judge, because in 18 hours I did 19,756 steps, which is like 7.1 miles around my polling place. So
good.
I was going to say, Mike, you look very thin this morning.
Ooh, now you're being the flattering one. But I did notice that there was we have 5 precincts at my polling place, and we had over 1,000 people come through and vote yesterday, on the day of, and there was a lot of people that showed up and surrendered their ballots. In Illinois, if you request a mail-in ballot, you have to surrender your ballot at the polling place if you're going to vote either early or on the day of the election, because otherwise you could then go home and mail that ballot and vote twice. We had a lot of surrendered ballots. We had very few, and this surprised me, people that had requested mail-in ballots and did not have them ready to surrender. In that case, that voter is a provisional vote. We only had about 5 people out of that 1,000 plus that did not have their ballots to surrender and had to vote provisionally.
That's wonderful news. And I just posted a link that I want to share with everyone. So your experience actually models what happened across much of the country. So there was an app that was put out by the NAACP called Say 2020. So if you see something, say something. Say 2020. And on this, they were cataloging issues that voters were having exercising their right to vote. And they put them in certain categories. So what I would invite you to do first, if you go to this link, is go to the segment labeled Joy, Joy. And what this was is if you encountered something while you were exercising your right to vote that made you happy or was positive or something like that, it went under the Joy category. So start there first. And the reason I'm suggesting that is the simple truth of human nature, particularly with Americans, is that we are at our best when things are at their worst. That is true, regardless of where you fall on the political spectrum. So under the joy category, I was so encouraged to see people encouraging others. There were professional musicians who were playing their string instruments, cellos and violins and things, and serenading people waiting in line. Other people were donating food. There's a story about a native, I think it's a Navajo tribe, who used Google to map addresses so that their entire community could get access to polling data and census data. All of these things are in there, and it's all across the country. Red districts, blue districts, everything in between. So start at joy. Then the second thing that I would encourage you to look at is how few incidences there really were of voter suppression, at least particularly on this app. Now, Brandon covered one that happened in Graham, North Carolina, and it was an egregious violation of citizens' rights. So those things are still happening, but they're so incredibly rare when we talk about millions of people casting their ballot. So that's another good thing, right? So through all of that, you can see what's going on and who's following up on it. Then the other part of that was under the ballot category, there were a lot of people who didn't understand how their voting worked. And part of that was because of COVID and the mail-in ballot and things like that. There seemed to be a lot of confusion, and particularly for people on the right, because they were confusing the absentee ballot and the mail-in ballot as different things. So Mike, did you see any of that? Any type of questions about the difference between an absentee ballot and a mail-in ballot, or were people pretty well versed by the time they got into election day?
I mean, in Illinois, there's functionally no difference between an absentee ballot and a mail-in ballot. They're identical. So there wasn't a lot of question as to that. There were, most people seemed pretty well versed. They knew what they were going in there for. There's always those, occasional people who, we had one particular voter who check marked, and in Illinois, you have to, or at least in McHenry County where I am, you have to fill in the bubble, but had check marked just every bubble, and was very confused as to why it wasn't working when he went to go put it in the tabulator.
Yeah. You will get that on occasion, and this was from Ed, you fill in the bubble. So small incidents like that, understandable, right? Especially when we have so many new voters who've never really done the process before. It happens, but I think when you look at the broad spectrum across the country, things went pretty well. So that is another positive. I think that this shows that we're all in it together, and we've got to help each other through it. And my personal goal is we need to be at an 8% voter turnout or better. And we got pretty close yesterday, and we'll wait for the rest of the totals to come in as they're still counting millions of ballots. But that's where we need to be as an engaged citizen participating in democracy. So hopefully we'll get there. One of the things, and I was checking ballot initiatives, Illinois, oh boy, the oligarchs and the millionaires prevailed over the graduated income tax proposal. So this one I was watching in particular because I left McHenry County, where Mike is at, and I am now in New Mexico that does have a graduated income tax. And just by crossing the border, I saved myself about $2,500 in taxes by going to a graduated income tax. But Illinois has decided not to. And I got the robocalls, and I got the outreach from the millionaire PACs trying to get me to vote no on the graduated tax. So Illinois, right? So
we have to talk.
Yeah. So I've said this before, somebody always pays, always. And whether it's you're paying up front or on the back end, somebody's always got to pay that bill. So when Illinois voted down the graduated tax to have more tax parity, fairness across those top incomes, well, that bill's still going to come due. So guess where it's coming from? Those middle and lower income workers. So
but not New Mexico.
No, not New Mexico. And New Mexico, let's be honest, New Mexico has the highest inequality in the United States. And there are other reasons for that, which I'll get into in another time. But Illinois is quickly catching up.
I
So
actually
this
have
is
a
going to be a
theory,
problem.
Carrie, if you may,
Go ahead.
as to why the graduated income tax failed in Illinois, because the big pushing point was that they're going to tax your retirement income. As we know, one of the largest voting blocks in the nation is the retired individuals. So once they put that narrative in there as if this was going to change the rules and allow them to do it when they could right now if they wanted to, regardless of the graduated income tax, but they don't, and that every state that has a graduated income tax taxes retirement income, which again is not a true thing. So you wound up with a lot of the silver vote going against.
Right.
And
this
I
is
have
where
I have
messaging-
a theory as well. Would you like to hear it?
Have at.
Okay. Well, my theory is that people voted no for the graduated income tax because a lot of Americans haven't graduated. So why should it tax?
Oh, Andy, that's so bad. So bad. But when it comes to fiscal understanding, you're kind of right. Well, we don't understand how money actually works and the relationship between states and federal spending. And yeah, that's always been a problem, particularly with the pension issue in Illinois and, that perpetual kicking the can. So, Mike, it almost sounds like, if your theory is correct, it sounds like this might have been performative in nature. This is, we make a proposal that sounds good on the surface, but in reality, I actually want it to work. So we put in something nefarious, like taxing Social Security income. So I don't know. Maybe.
It sounds plausible.
There were a couple of that's kind of how things work. But on the bright side, New Jersey, Arizona, Montana, and South Dakota legalized recreational marijuana. So for those who live in those states, New Jersey, Arizona, Montana, and South Dakota, here's what I recommend to you. Read the law that goes into effect, because what I found with Illinois' law that made recreational legal back in January is it does not offer protections for employees. So in Illinois' law, it you could be exposed termination or types of legal implications if they test you, your employer tests you, and you come out positive for THC. So very careful about how that law reads. Illinois, while it's legal, you have really very few protections as a consumer of a legal product. So that's another story that I definitely want to work on, because one I found was interesting is Illinois' law also restricts where the supply can come from. And when there was a supply chain issue in Illinois with Illinois growth, they extended it to Michigan as an emergency service. However, the price disparity in Illinois has not been alleviated. So in Illinois, when you're going out for recreational cannabis, the price comparison is very, very telling. So if you're buying like 3.5 grams, you can expect to pay at a dispensary anywhere between 62 and 75 or more for 3.5 grams, whereas in California or here in New Mexico, 35, 40, and there is no good reason for it. So, hey, thanks Dawn for the shout out. She gave me compliments. So again, compliment to the Aveda University for all of they fixed all of this yesterday. So I'm very happy. It was my second haircut of the year, and thank you to the students there. So there's that. But the big story here. We look at the election map this morning and we can damn near a 50-50 split from the House to the Senate to the presidential race. Here is the takeaway as far as I see it. We all want the same thing, right? Whether you're on the left or you're on the right or wherever I saw come out of that election in talking to voters and talking to people who consider themselves MAGA and hardcore Trump supporters. When you have an actual conversation with someone, it's all coming from the same place. And then Andy and I had talked about it before, that if you're on the left and you put yourself in a bubble and you're only consuming MSNBC or CNN, you're only going to get one side of the story. If you're on the Trump train and you're well into QAnon and all of these things, you are only going to get part of the story. So to me this morning, the electoral map reflects that perfectly. So for example, in conversations with my neighbors, they had no idea, no understanding whatsoever that trillions was given to Wall Street in February and March. They were confusing what I was saying with the CARES Act because they had never heard the information that went from the Fed and Steve Mnuchin to Wall Street. They did not know. Okay. And then on the left, when we talk about kids in cages and use that as a cudgel against Trump and how horrific it is, they don't know the family separation policy had already been in effect. They have no idea that when it came time to cut funding for that, Pelosi and the other Democrats were on board with funding those things. They have no idea that Pelosi and Chuck Schumer could have sent lawyers and judges to the border. Instead, they sent deodorant, toothpaste, and soap. So this is where we are. And this is why the map so perfectly reflects this closeted narrative. And Mike, I want to bring you into the conversation because we talked about this under the 3-part series that we did for the monolithic Latino vote and how that was so wrong and fundamental lack of understanding, particularly on the left, of how there are Latinos for Trump and all of these other things. And I think it really comes down to putting ourselves in that social political bubble. Would you agree, or am I off base?
No, I think you're 100% on point there. It's there's all sorts of social political bubbles, and it's even easier to seal yourself off into an echo chamber nowadays. It's almost like we've regressed as far as that's concerned, as in my opinion, that when the internet first was getting out there and everybody was getting out there onto the internet, they were exposed to a plethora of ideas. Now with Facebook and your ability to shut yourself down into those bubbles, you've lost that free flow of information, hack the planet style of the information wants to be free in a lot of places, and that has only contributed to it further. Not to mention that it seems like each side will flip the script just to hit the other side. For example, when it looked like Trump might pardon Julian Assange. It was, all of a sudden it was a bad thing from the anti-Trump people. It flips back and forth, and it's just about scoring points. And the more points you score, the better you feel about yourself, and that translates into those bubbles.
Yeah, and it absolutely becomes a team rather than politics and our livelihood, right? So in the back of all of these conversations is still a fearful that you're going to tax my Social Security. I'm fearful that my income is going to be taxed. I'm fearful that my rights are going away. And if you look at the argument on both sides onto Blue Lives Matter versus Black Lives Matter, when you stick to those polarizing, the polarized framing of each of those, then you're never going to find that conversation in the middle. However, if you sit down, and I have done this, if you sit down and talk to somebody who's a Blue Lives Matter and you say, okay, look, I absolutely support the police helping citizens, and I support them understanding civics and understanding that they're there to protect. But when they don't understand due process and they take themselves out of the position of helpful into judge and executioner, then we all lose. And I want that to change. I want to give them better support. I want to give them the same level of training and restraint that we give to our soldiers in war, because they don't fire first and ask questions later. They are trained very well not to do that. But yet we're giving our police officers more responsibility than they really are equipped to handle, and it's unfair to them, and we're putting them in harm's way. So if you have that kind of conversation, not saying that that's perfect, but if you start there, you're going to get more of a consensus than Black Lives Matter or Blue Lives, when in fact they both do. And let's talk about that, because I don't think that there's any person on the MAGA train who will willingly admit that they want their neighbors to die. I don't think that there's anyone on the MAGA train who will willingly admit that they want to use our police officers as a means to start a civil war, with the exception of some of these far-right boogaloo boys and things like that.
Which are getting all the media attention.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and especially when it comes to Blue Lives Matter and the MAGA side, I have a special place in the bottom of my heart for these, for the people that are flying the Gaston flag, "Don't tread on me," alongside a blue, the thin blue line flag. And it's like, who do you think, if they're going to come for your guns, who do you think's going to do that?
That's exactly right. And we saw that in Illinois when you had the gentleman out of Aurora, Illinois, who had already been flagged as a risk. And way that the law read in Illinois is the sheriff, police officers may go and confiscate and check on this individual who's been, we know, owns firearms, when instead that law should read shall, not may. So when the officers are serving the public good by checking in on somebody who could be a risk to the rest of the public, yeah, it's going to be your police officers who do that, right? So it's one of those arguments that is so easy to pull apart, but we get caught in the emotion of it, and we to the tactic of our emotion and ego rather than, like I said before, taking the parental standpoint. So whether you are a parent of a child or a fur baby or whatever, whenever they throw a tantrum, if you give in to that emotion, then you're going to make it worse. But if you stand up and be the adult in the room and ignore that emotional outburst and continue on with joy, pragmatism, love, reaching out to that person, hey, I get it, I understand, I see you person. Now let's talk about what really bothers you. Then you're going to have a wholly different outcome. And that to me is what I see in the map that we are all waking up to, in that 50-50. You have a choice here. You can continue to be dug in and we're going to go to a really negative space, or you can be the adults and start having those one-on-one conversations with your family, the family that you've shut down. In my own, both my parents passed away, but before they passed away, they were very much on the Trump train and had gone into a deeply racist space. Point where their own family members and grandchildren who had mixed racial heritage, they had disowned them. So my mistake was not continuing to reach out to them. I responded then as a parent, as somebody who was just horrified by by all of that, by shutting down. And I see now that that was my mistake. What I should have done is refuse to let go, refuse to close those channels, and refuse to allow them to sit in that narrative and continue to media narratives that don't care about them, that only care about profit. So based on my experience, to do the same, it's not going to be easy. And maybe it's easier who happens to be someone in your community than a family member. But the risk in not going forward with that, we can see that this morning. Right.
Oh, absolutely.
So the only people who are making
Absolutely.
money off this.
And I think that Americans particularly, and this is true with a number of different places in the world, but especially America right now, is that we have to come to an understanding as people that we have more in common than not in common, right? That the reason why people are so polarized in the United States is because of the neoliberal corporate elites are emphasizing the differences instead of the similarities, right? That keeps people polarized. That keeps people fighting against one another. I could never talk to you because you don't have my best interest at heart, right? Instead of that, people have to come to terms with the fact that we all want to take care of our families. We all want to be happy. We all want to eat, right? All of those things, human beings in the United States are all looking for the same thing. But these differences are being exacerbated by mainstream media and the oligarch society that we live in. That's the true narrative that has to come to the surface before any of these gaps are fixed.
I agree,
Oh,
Andy.
I would agree.
Yeah, and it goes to something I say a lot is that I try to point out to people is there's no such Dr. Evil in real life who does things because he knows that they're evil.
There isn't?
No 1 million. They do things because they think that it's the right thing to do. Even when you go to the people that want to ban abortion, to remove that right to choose, they're not doing that because they want to do something evil. They're doing it because they think it's right. And you have to try and reason with them to understand your angle. And sometimes it's not going to happen. They're just so set in their way.
And America has to get back to figuring out how to rebuild community, how to rebuild society, right? Because right now it's the individual pit one against another, right? We've lost that ability to have discussions with your neighbors, have free sharing of ideas with one another, how a bunch of people in a community, on a street, in a county get together for the greater good of society, right? It doesn't make life, it doesn't fit the nature of the politics right now if people are happy and they're trusting, right? You have to think that your neighbors are sitting on their front porch with a shotgun loaded, pointed at you, and you stay away from me and get away from my stuff, right? That's the way it's being portrayed. And that's what America's lost. And quite honestly, from what I can tell, it's only America, right? That's why it's such a foreign idea to people in the rest of the world that it's not like that in Canada or Europe or Africa or anywhere else. Uh-huh. This is an American phenomenon. And as part of us as a world community, we have to help try to tell Americans that you're being hoodwinked, right? You are in a broken society, and we want you to be part of the world community, but you've got to get past all of this propaganda that's being thrown at you from your media, from your politicians, from corporations, from the rich people that keep you divided and scared in your basement.
That's exactly right. This is where the major networks are actually taking advantage of people, because we know from sociology, from all of these studies and experiments going back 60, 70 years, that when you perpetually put somebody in a fear state, concern, fear, and this is what Fox News started with and they were famous for, but we've seen MSNBC and Rachel Maddow and these personalities perpetuate that fear. The fear response has a chemical in the human brain to make you more susceptible and open to suggestion. So this is why corporations continually go back to the fear and the sensationalism, because they actually profit from it, right? And they profit from making the case. And I think, Jimmy Dore, for his own positive, negative, whatever, he had a segment on the other day where he was talking about the head of MSNBC laughing during the last presidential election, said, yeah, we gave Trump millions of dollars of free advertising, and that may not be good for America, but it sure was good for our network. It's not changed. Change whether they're covering Biden or Trump in an empty podium or any of this hyperbole that's going on. This is all performative at the upper levels. In what they are doing is putting neighbor against neighbor, and that's the divide. So if you get nothing else out of this program, the idea that there's one person, one politician, one office holder that is going to bridge that divide is a fallacy. The only person who can bridge the divide is you. And that's it. So whether you decide to take up that mission and that challenge is really going to be up to you. Take the time you need right now. Be patient with yourself. But that is the person that bridges the divide. You.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And if you identify as a capitalist right now and, American exceptionalism and don't believe what we're saying or don't agree with anything that we put forward here, I want you to look at one thing specifically right now. In the markets, right, in the stock market, we are told by the market that the market dislikes what we currently have for results in the election, right? That a strong market would come out of a decisive victory for either the left or the right from this conflict. And we've got the absolute farthest thing from that. We've got this completely non-finished, who knows how it's going to turn, which should say that the market would be in a downward movement right now because of that. Go look at the numbers. They're fine. Everything's fine. Nothing to see here. Why is that? Because there's no difference with the current political process right now between the left and the right.
Right. That's exactly right. So on the backdrop of this, we are still struggling with phase 2 of COVID, phase 3 in some places. So this is really where you working with your neighbors in your local community really helps. And I think being here in New Mexico, even though New Mexico went blue last night, New Mexico is heavily populated by Republican leaning voters and representatives. There's no one here talking about don't wear a mask and it's a conspiracy. Why? Because the message from neighbors to neighbors, from business to business, from hospitals, everything, when you drive down the highway and the highway boards to the billboards to everything else says protect your doctors and nurses, wear your mask. It's not politicized. None of it. It's about community And I think that's a lesson that we can learn as we go forward and rebrand and message these things as progressives, because we know we are not far left, we are not socialists. We are our policy, fiscally responsible, socially sound policy. When people hear what our policies actually are, from Medicare for all to the Green New Deal, all of these things, when they actually get to hear what these are about, there is very few pushback from populations on the right or the left. They start to get it. They really get it. And I think that my experience moving here from Illinois, that was supposed to be blue but really isn't, has just been eye-opening in the way that it could be. So this is why I want this message of hope to progressives in particular, that now is your time. I know that we fought hard during the election and we were out for our policies and our candidates, but right now, whether you have stepped up to run for office, whether you were out there marching, this is where you have the opportunity to shine with your neighbors, with your community, with your elected representatives, all of the above. This is where you get to live that progressive message of inclusion and understanding and hope, but still be the adult in the room and shut down either the rhetoric on the left or the right that wants to keep us divided. So this is why this morning I'm like, I've never seen results like this before, but there could not be a more clear clarion call to progressives we saw this morning.
Right. That's what the election has revealed to us, a number of things that we've known. But people that don't consider themselves progressives, okay, have some very hard questions to ask themselves, right? Specifically, why did 2020 almost go exactly the same as 2016? Why did the numbers say that the Democrats were going to win and they didn't? If that's going to be the case, right? And you have to look at the reasons why that happened. We have a huge block of people in the United States that nobody was interested in courting. That's the working people of the US. And nobody was interested in getting them on board as voters. All the Democrats, even if they had no intention of a progressive agenda in any way, all they had to have said was, we will enter discussions to see whether Medicare for all is a viable option. Leave the door open. But they weren't capable of doing that. Like this election was gettable for both sides. Like the situation was set up perfectly that all that either side had to do was extend even the shortest of olive branches to the people that are hurting in this country. And neither side did it. It was a complete comedy of errors. So now the people of the United States have to ask themselves why. And, you know, as progressives, we have a way that we feel that things happen and why they occur, and that includes, you know, everything from macroeconomics to the political environment to what's going on around us, right? And hopefully these questions will start to be asked by people who have never asked them before, right? The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. Well, I'm calling you insane now. Prove to me why you're not.
Right. No, good point. Good point. And on that note, I think we've covered pretty much everything. So, Mike, do you have any final thoughts where you sit heavily in Trump country in blue? Is it still blue?
You mean you broke up there a little bit? Were you alerting to my purple comments from the past there?
Yes.
Where it's so red here, even the blue side's purple. Um, uh,
Yeah.
there is hope. I see hope. Some things make me not have that hope, like to your thing about the billboards and stuff like that, about the community and wear your mask. I saw a report that there was actually robocalls going out in this area telling you that you don't have to wear a mask to go vote, so you shouldn't. Um, so despite those rare outliers, there's always hope. If there isn't hope, then we have nothing. All we can do is hope.
Right. Okay. On that note, thank you, Mike. Thank you, Andy. And I would just remind everyone that the sun still came up today. You're still breathing. You're still here. And while all of these are true, there's still hope. So take care of yourselves. Medicate responsibly. Reach out to friends. Just really start to grow that sense of community. And I think we're going to be okay.
Yes,
So,
I would agree with that. And I think that another reason why it's important that, the initiative of legalization of marijuana in the United States is, if it doesn't matter who won, clearly Americans are going to need recreational drugs to get through the next little while.
Pretty much. And on that note, my dispensary delivers. So I will catch up with you on Friday.
Take care, everybody.
We bout that, ayy. We in the zone, we out here, yeah. Spitting the facts, how it's supposed to be. Hair of the dog, we keeping it G. Whoa.